Here we're given an inverted parabola and a point P on the parabola, and we're asked about this distance between P and the origin. Now, if you look closely, the point P forms a triangle, a right triangle, where you have sides with lengths x and y. So the x coordinate of the point P is the dimension of one of the sides, and the y coordinate of the point P is the length of the other side. So using the Pythagorean theorem, we can say that OP squared is equal to x squared plus y squared. So that's your OP squared. X squared is simply x squared, and y squared, we can replace y with the expression given in the question, the quadratic. So now that's how to answer it. You would now simply need to expand these brackets, i.e. square this expression, then gather like terms and simplify and see if it looks anything like that. So if you have a binomial like this and you need to square it, it's the first term squared, so 5 squared is 25, then the first term times the second term times 2, that gives you minus 5x squared, and then the second term squared, so that's 1/4 x to the power 4. And then you just collect like terms, and that will give you your negative 4x squared. Then bring that to the beginning, and you have the same expression that they're asking you to show. So the key here was to realize that you have a right triangle here, and you can use the Pythagorean theorem. Now the question then goes on to say, if we have a function f of x equal to this, it happens to be the same expression, find the values of x for which f dash, that's the first derivative of this, is equal to 0. So differentiating that, what you do is you multiply the power times the coefficient and then subtract 1 from the power. So 4 times 1/4, and then you subtract 1 from 4. And then you do the same here, and 25 just gives you a 0. So simplifying that gives you that. And they are saying find the values for x. So we need to solve this, right? The reason we have a equal 0 here is because that's exactly what we are being asked to solve. So how do you solve something like this? It's cubic, so not that easy, but there's clearly a common factor. So you can take x as a common factor, and now we have a quadratic, which happens to be a difference of 2 squares. So 8 isn't a perfect square, so you might not immediately think this is a difference of 2 squares, but we can nevertheless just treat it as square root of 8 squared. So that becomes x plus square root of 8 times x minus square root of 8. And because these three terms are multiplied to give you 0, that means either the first one is equal to 0, or the second term is equal to 0, or the third term is equal to 0. So that gives us 3 values for x. So x1, x2, and x3. And the question said, find the values for x. These are the values for x. Now the question then goes on to say hence or otherwise, and it's always a good idea to try the hence first, find the minimum distance from O to the curve. Now remember, any point on the curve is P. So the distance from O to any point on the curve is just OP. And we've shown that OP squared is that, which equals to f of x. So we know that OP squared is equal to f of x, and therefore OP is just f of x, and that is the distance from O to the curve. So the distance is OP. So what we're trying to do is minimize OP, and therefore we're minimizing OP squared. So if you have a minimum value for OP, we also have a minimum value for OP squared. So we want to minimize this. And to minimize this, you want the derivative to be equal to 0. And we've already done that. So we've already found the 3 points for which the derivative will be equal to 0. So that's our derivative, and setting it equal to 0 will give us our 3 values for x. So that's already done. We don't need to repeat that. But they do say, show that your answer is a minimum, and to do that, you would need to take the second derivative. So if you differentiate that again, that's your second derivative, and then you plug in your 3 values for x. So if you put in x equals 0 there, that will give you a second derivative of -8. And because it's less than 0, we know that's a maximum. Now they're looking for the distance being a minimum. So a maximum is no good. So we can eliminate that. That is no good for us. So we try the other points. If x equals square root of 8 or 2 root 2. Now it doesn't really matter if you try the negative or positive because it's going to get squared anyway. So that'll give you 16, which is greater than 0. Greater than 0 means a minimum, so that is what we're looking for. So now we know that these 2 points will give us the minimum distance. Now we need to find the distance. And remember, the distance is the square root of f of x. So we know the value of x. That's the formula from the question for OP squared. So OP will simply be the square root of that. But instead of x, we're going to put in our 2 root 2, or square root of 8. So that's my x there and there. So put all that together. You shouldn't need a calculator, but even if you put it in your calculator, you'll end up with 3. So that's your minimum distance for OP. So don't forget to take the square root. I hope you found that helpful.